Hey guys, in today's resilience call, we're talking about neck tension. Neck tension is a pretty big topic for me. It's one that I've both treated for a long time in the clinic. It's one that I've kind of dealt with off and on throughout the years, and it was kind of something that was sneaky. Like I had more neck tension building up over time that I didn't necessarily know was building up until it became a problem. And as we begin to unpack neck tension, I think what we find is a lot of surprising layers, a lot of interesting influences that contribute to our neck tension. Neck tension in and of itself doesn't seem like a bad thing, but we know that if it persists, it can lead to things like pain at the neck, headaches, jaw issues, TMJ dysfunction, the list goes on. So it's useful, I think, to learn these kind of principles, the systems, the strategies, these main ideas that can help us to navigate neck tension, get a sense of what it really means, and then what we can do about it, right? How do we approach this? It does seem like one of the areas where people kind of get stuck, like they're a little bit plateaued. And for that reason, that's why I want to dive into this because over the years, I certainly found that, well, there were some layers, some aspects to the neck tension that just weren't being addressed. And for that reason, a lot of PTs, a lot of people in general were running into these roadblocks as to what was stopping the progression of decreasing the neck pain and decreasing the tension and so forth. So what I want to do for you today is really consolidate the main ideas that I think are evergreen, these ideas that are well vetted, both what we see in the literature, what I've experienced in my own personal practice and my practice in the clinic and with patients and with clients. So with that, let's kind of dive in. We want to get rid of our neck pain, right? And we want to have a strategy to keep it at bay, right? So that it doesn't creep back in. Life will try to do that. That is the natural progression of things, right? Things will start to stiffen up, but we have a lot that we can really do to keep our neck health, to keep our neck muscles and joints really robust. So really the first thing that we want to get into is what is neck tension, right? So let's define what we're talking about here. The simple way that I think about tension in the body is plan B stability. So in our movement system, we have stability and we have mobility. And so stability, we have some different strategies there. So plan B stability is the stiffness, the tension that we get in, this could be any muscle, any joint. So it's plan B. It wasn't what we were born with, right? It's the stability that's kind of crept up, and it provides stability for the movement system for our body. But it's not plan A. Plan A is robust muscles and joints, full expression of movement, and strong at end range on either side and strong through the range as well. It's muscles that are pliable. They're kind of soft to the touch when they're relaxed, as opposed to stiff when we interact with them. So tension is really, for all intents and purposes, or our intents and purposes, is going to be two layers. So I like to think about it as like top layer, bottom layer, and the top layer is neuromotor. That is us being an electrical system, right? So the nervous system is what tells the muscle to activate. And largely we have nerves that are two-way streets. The large majority of nerves are both sensory and motor. So the motor part is the top down, from the brain, from the spinal cord out to a muscle, out to an organ. And I say top layer because that's usually the part that we have to modulate first. It's the first part that we get rid of, right? And then the next layer is fascia. And sometimes I say neurofascia because the fascia is highly innervated as well, as we're coming to learn in recent years. The research that we're getting is showing how much the nervous system really has a say in how the fascia behaves. More on that later. So the first thing that we want to talk about is that neuromotor component. That's where the large majority of our initial improvement is going to come from in getting rid of the tension, in modulating the tension. So the way I like to think about this is the macro aspect and then the micro. So really what we want to do is macro first in this top-down fashion. And then we get into the micro. This is a better recipe. I think I've certainly found that doing the macro first and then the micro it's just easier. It feels a lot less like paddling upstream. So that'll make more sense in just a moment. The macro is the top-down stuff, the top-down nervous system. And really, we mean this kind of literally. Top-down meaning brain, spinal cord, and then the periphery. It's kind of top-down, but also front to back. So if we think about how the brain develops from childhood into adolescence and adulthood, bottom up, and then forward, and then finally the last part of development. The last part is the prefrontal cortex. That's our executive function. That's our logical brain. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're using the most developed part of the brain to then modulate the lower centers, which then modulates the rest of the body. So it's kind of like the tide raising all ships, right? So when we make higher level changes, it influences the entire rest of the nervous system, right? The bottom up strategy would feel a little bit like paddling upstream. And so bottom up is like, oh, I massaged the muscle, I got it to soften or relax, and it feels better now. But if the top down signals are still one of tension, protection, well, that muscle is very likely just going to stiffen up again very soon. And then we just find ourselves on this hamster wheel of massaging the muscle and then the tension comes back. Massaging the muscle feels better momentarily, tension and pain comes back, right? Maybe that's been your experience. Certainly was mine for a little while. So the top-down strategy is really the breath, right? This is where the breath and the nervous system come in. The way I like to think about this is the upstream effect. The breath influences the nervous system then influences our next chain of events. You can look that one up. That's the upstream effect. Just search that one in Skool, and you can learn more about that one. But basically, it just goes breath and posture, nervous system, then it's emotions, then it's thoughts, then it's actions and behaviors, so on and so forth. Yeah, feel free to check that one out. We won't go so much into that one today. But the macro stuff, the breath, is really what we talk about a lot here in this community. So I won't go into too much detail there, but just know that the way that we breathe is the top, right? It is the biggest influence on the whole rest of the nervous system. The breath is the most adaptive part of our biology, the most adaptive part of our physiology. It's the thing that is acting first, and then the rest of the nervous system follows suit. Yeah. So from there, we get into the micro. The micro is the local spots in the body. So in this case, of course, we're talking about the muscles around the neck, and we'll also include the muscles around the shoulders. And the reason that we do that is the muscles that we're talking about here are largely accessory breathing muscles. So these are ones that pull the ribs up, is the easy way to think about it. Now, these are the big movers around the neck and the shoulders. So we have layers underneath, the smaller muscles that cross one segment of the neck and so forth. Those aren't breathing muscles, but the bigger muscles are. And ideally, those muscles just do their other job, their primary job, which is to stabilize the neck, stabilize the shoulder, move the neck, move the shoulder. But they can have this other job as well, which is to help us to breathe. But that's our secondary strategy. Okay, we'll kind of talk, I think, a little bit more about that as we move along. But one really useful idea in the local modulation of a muscle. The muscle and the neuromotor component is the easiest to modulate. It's the lowest hanging fruit. So one technique that I use all of the time, like quite a bit, for myself and for my patients is called strain counter strain. Strain counter strain. And strain counter strain is really a way to navigate trigger points in the muscles. So that's the terminology that I find most compelling. Trigger points have a certain type of behavior, and we can have trigger points along a muscle. And some muscles have several, some muscles will have one, and they're kind of in unique areas, okay? And the way that we can tell if something is a trigger point, so if you push on a muscle, we apply some type of pressure and it feels tight, maybe it feels uncomfortable when you push on it, that will start to point towards this likely being a trigger point. The real way that we know if it's a trigger point is if it responds well, favorably, to this technique, strain counter strain. So strain counter strain looks like this. It's a simple recipe. You're going to take a muscle, we're going to shorten it and place it in a slackened, relaxed position. So for example, if I were to use my bicep, what I would do is I could shorten it this way. And if I applied pressure here, then the muscle doesn't have to work. So normally we're thinking about the muscle contracting and shortening, but we're actually just going to do the movement for it. And sometimes we have to get creative as to how we do that with certain muscles in the body. But the bicep would just look like this, right? I'm just going to hold it. I would relax my elbow to really try to make it the most relaxing position possible. But a trigger point would be something like where I would scan first, looking again for tight and or tender spots. And trigger points are tender. Trigger points are tender. So let's say I found one like right there. I'm like, okay, that's tender when I push on it. And so what I would do is I would spend 90 seconds. 90 seconds is the average time it takes for the average person, average muscle, for that spot to relax. So what I would do is I would put my bicep in a shortened, relaxed position in the clinic. So when I'm doing this for other people, and when I'm doing it for myself, ideally I would keep just a little bit of pressure on that spot. So we would go like this. We go 90 seconds. And then we would come back out, and then we would check it and see if it's still tender. Okay. So I was thinking about doing one of these together, but maybe we'll save that for the end, because we could do it for the neck, right? And if we think about muscles that are on the side, roughly what we would do is we would just side bend and we kind of like hang out, maybe support the neck. We go for 90 seconds, and then we would just give it the environment for it to relax. So the whole kind of scene or theme of this is one of safety. The nervous system, when it does stiffen up, oftentimes is doing that as a protective mechanism, as a way to keep ourselves safe, right? If it's just stiff, it's like, yeah, temporarily it is safer, right? The muscle isn't at risk of lengthening and tearing, and the joint isn't at risk of moving too far and injuring itself. So closing down our movement options is a strategy. It works. It's a good strategy, but temporarily. So what we're doing is we're starting to restore the robustness of our muscles and of our joints. Okay. So I think that's all we need to say about strain counter strain. Let's next get into the mechanics, right? So the movement specific to the neck. And what we're really going to do is we're going to start with the neck and then expand to the rest of the spine. That's important to do. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the cervical, our neck, cardinal planes. So cardinal planes are just the three kind of main directions that we want to think about. And the way that we do this, or the way that we like to remember this, is yes, no, and maybe. So yes, forward, backward, no, rotation, and then maybe is what we call our side to side. Okay. We can do like neck circles, that's perfectly fine, but I recommend starting with yes, no, and maybe. So we can go through this. Yeah. Ideally, when we start, we want to go through just the neck movement in the cardinal planes in a good posture. Okay. So we'd sit up nice and tall. See how far you can go forward and how far you can go backward. How much flexion we have available to us and how much extension. Yeah. We don't want to blow through any painful barriers. We want to pay close attention to what it feels like through the movement, and certainly when we get to the end range. End range could just be stiffness. It could be pain. End range is sometimes a decision, right? It's just like, oh, it's kind of painful. That's my end. And that's perfectly fine. Just being honest with where you're at in that moment. Generally speaking, flexion and extension have some different flavors. Flexion being more of a stretch, ideally just along the back of the neck. When we go to extend, however, that's going to load the facet joints in the back of the spine. So this is true for the neck, and it's certainly true for the rest of the spine as well. When we look at the facet joints in the neck, they're kind of oriented at an angle, kind of like shingles on a roof that's slanted. Yeah. So when we extend, they compress, and then when we flex, they decompress, they offload. That's their job. They're supposed to do that. But they are compressive structures. So generally, when we move into extension, we don't want to blow through any painful barriers. That can be certainly a little bit more risky than some of our other movements. So just be safe with that. As we try a few repetitions, it might begin to change, and that can be good information for us. But let's go through the next cardinal movements. Rotation, side to side, again in this more upright kind of regal posture. We're looking for about, like, it's not exactly 90 degrees, but if we can get to like 80 degrees or so it's we would consider that normal. Same type of idea here. Don't blow through any painful barriers. Just on your first repetition, 2 or 3, see what's available to you. And then if we do try some more repetitions, see if it changes over time. Does it get a little bit easier? Can I get further with less resistance or discomfort, etc.? And the change over time is really going to be one of the biggest clues as to whether or not we're giving it the right amounts, whether this is even a movement we should be focusing on right now. And then the last one is maybe, right? So nice and tall again. Side to side is kind of like our ear to the shoulder. Now we typically do this in this order: yes, no, and maybe. It makes the most sense for most people to practice it in this order. And this would even be true kind of on the daily practice, or like if you're going to do all of them all at once, but also people who are, let's say, really stiff, having a lot of neck pain. Well, they might just spend several days just focusing on improving forward, backward, improving the yes. And then days later, they'll work on the rotation and then eventually come into the side bends. Okay. So that's where we start. we just start to restore neck mobility. It is one of the more low-hanging fruits. It's one that we should definitely have in our back pocket and part of our probably daily practice if we are struggling with some neck tension. But it doesn't stop there. We want to incorporate the rest of the movement, the rest of the spine, the pelvis, eyes. This will make more sense in a moment. When we start to expand into the rest of the spine, it starts to look like this. So let's go through yes again. One way I like to do this one is by grabbing hold of the knee. So I'll kind of position like this here, grabbing a hold of the knee. And when we go forward, we kind of allow our whole pelvis to move. The rest of the spine flexes, we look down. The shoulders also kind of round, and the knee actually kind of pulls my hands forward. And then as we go up, we look up, we squeeze our shoulder blades. We extend at the rest of the spine. The pelvis tilts forward. It does this anterior tilt, okay? So this is what we call the normal pairing, where this is the out breath. So we exhale here, we inhale here. Exhale, inhale. Right? Just the natural patterning of things. So the shoulder blades are very active in this. That's an important part of this, especially as it relates to its connections up into the neck. Yeah. So that's the normal pairing. Normal pairing. So typically when we go through these movements, we breathe in correspondence with that movement. So I like to call that one our seated cat-cow. If you've practiced a cat-cow in your yoga flow, it's the same idea, but that's just from our quadruped, our hands and knees position. So seated cat-cow can be a fantastic, very easy one. It's readily available to us, yeah, where we can just do a few repetitions of our seated cat-cow, start to restore flexion and extension, incorporate the rest of the movement of the body. What I didn't mention is like the ribs are moving along with that too, so that's part of the natural pairing, right? So as we extend, shoulders go back, ribs come up, and then as we breathe out, ribs go down, shoulders go forward, looking down. Okay. So we want to make sure that we don't miss the normal pairing. That's our default pattern of the movement. Okay. Let's talk about opposite pairing. So opposite pairing is really important. So for those of us who are feeling some type of activation stiffness when we do the flexion and extension. So yes, we want to get very, very good at the normal pairing, but the opposite pairing is just as important to practice, especially if we're really stiff in this forward backward movement. The reason being is because a lot of us are spending a good amount of time doing the opposite pairing. So if I'm flexed, if I'm sitting and in a slouched position, is that more inhale biased or exhale biased, right? Which one does that pair with? Well, the flexion is exhale biased, right? So exhale biased. But a lot of us are sitting in this exhale biased position, trying to inhale, doing an inhale bias thing, ribs up. Even if it is nasal breathing, you can kind of see how my chest and shoulders move. Right? So notice how that's an opposite pairing, right? That is one of the biggest contributors to this neck stiffness and rib cage stiffness that we see. And yeah, we sit a lot as humans in the 21st century. So what we then need to do is the flip side of that. So instead of a flexion bias position, we would want to be in an extension bias position, spinal extension, pairing it with the exhale. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, I could just be extended lying down, right? I could just be lying on my back, face up, and breathing, okay? So the exhale bias just means, well, I'm gonna emphasize the exhale by letting it be longer, and then maybe squeezing at the bottom even, right? We can use our core braces directly tied into how we bring the ribs down, right? So remember, the pairing that a lot of us are doing when we sit is slumped, ribs up. So it's extended and ribs down when we do the lying down practice, okay? So supine, long exhale breathing can be a big part of that, restoring our normal mobility, helps with mobilizing the ribs, a lot of good stuff there. You could also extend the extension. you could spend time in a position that's a little bit more spinal extension. So some options would be prone, so your face down, but up on your elbows, okay? Up on your elbows. You could press up a little bit further, right, into like a sphinx pose, right? Sometimes on elbows we call sphinx pose, and then we press up. And then spending a little bit of time breathing in that same fashion, more of the exhale bias, right? Long, beautiful exhales, okay? That will require that you tolerate the CO2 building up, tolerating the air hunger, okay? That can just be part of the practice, getting a little bit more comfortable with that sensation of air hunger, of the sensation of the CO2 building up. There's really no way around that. We do have to start to tolerate that a little bit more. That'll change both physiologically and psychologically the more that you practice it. Okay, so that's cervical flexion extension. That's our yes. And then for no, what we like to do there is incorporate the rest of the spine just as we twist. So grabbing hold of the knee, furniture. Let's try that. Maybe you can see a little bit better. So yeah, grabbing hold of the furniture and just looking as far as you can to the side. So it would be ideally being able to look directly behind you, each direction. Okay. And what we like to do with the rotation is bring the breath in with this as well. So on the inhale, we get some expansion. And then on the exhale, we advance the position. So it kind of looks like this. I would inhale. And then as I breathe out, I can go a little bit further. And then inhale, come back. Do at least one full breath cycle as you rotate. That can be a fantastic place to start. And then when we get into the side bends, the way I like to do this one is to use your sofa, use your mattress, so that you can place your elbow down, your forearm down on a surface to the side of you. And so here I can easily get more force into the side bend, right? So this is ear to shoulder, looking for a stretch on the top side, ideally avoiding compression or kind of pressure pinching on the side that's down. Okay. Now, one thing that I like to play with here is the shoulder activation. So I could be strong pushing away and still doing my side bend, but I could also just drop down and fully rest my head on my shoulder. So it's actually in contact now, okay? There's a little bit of play here, so I could kind of rotate as well and start to work on some of these muscles that are sitting positioned at a bit of an angle. So maybe this stretch feels really good for you and you can just move it and feel around so we can get into many of the muscles on the side of the neck. And that one is especially important because the scalenes are the name for these muscles that sit on the side of the neck. Not this one here, that's the SCM, but the one underneath it, or the three that are underneath it. We have three on either side, and those are huge. Like, that is their primary role, is the accessory breathing, pulling the ribs up, because those muscles start at the side of the neck and they attach down into ribs 1 through 3. Okay, so they pull the ribs up, and can be just one of the most common muscles that are contributing to the stiffness that we get into the neck. Okay, and with that one, we don't have to overcomplicate it. We're just going to spend some time in that position, breathing. As we breathe, especially as we build the breath up, those muscles are going to start to be active. Big inhales are going to cause those muscles to contract, and then the long exhales will allow those muscles to relax and lengthen. So that kind of leads us to our next point, which is the second layer. How do we make fascia level changes? So hopefully at this point we've really modulated the top layer, the neuromotor aspect, by direct pressure, doing our strain counter strain, a little bit of massage, following it up with some stretches. This, of course, the first thing was changing our breathing so that our top-down nervous system is in our favor. But then we get into the fascia. Okay, So there's a lot of cool things going on with the fascia, but one of the big ones that we want to talk about today that I think will be really helpful is one property that the fascia has, which is viscoelasticity. So the viscoelastic property of fascia is kind of like how putty behaves. So putty, if we pull on it really fast, it's like stiff, right? It will give us a lot of resistance. However, if we take that same putty and we start to slowly pull, right, just a little bit of pressure, but give it some more time, it will start to it moves easier. Yeah. So all our connective tissue, our fascia, is just like that. Yeah. When we run, we want our Achilles tendon, for example, to be relatively stiff. We don't want it to be ooey gooey. But if we hold our positions longer, low load, long duration, that will start to make changes to the connective tissue, to the fascia. So what kind of happens oftentimes is it stiffens up in a weird way where some fibers are like tighter than others, but when we just slowly give it tension and over a long enough time, it starts to reorganize itself in the direction of the force that we're trying to get better at. Yeah. And that's how we can make some really meaningful long-term changes to the fascia. The fascia runs everywhere in the body. It's what holds our organs in place. It's what envelops the muscles, and then even the smaller bundles within the muscle. It's our tendons, it's our ligaments. And so it really, for all intents and purposes, behaves the same way. There's some variations, some different flavors within the different areas of the body and what type of connective tissue we're talking about. But for the most part, that's how it's going to behave, okay? So what I recommend doing there is spending 2 to 4 minutes in a stretch, right? After we've done all of these things, we'll spend 2 to 4 minutes at the end range in one of these positions, okay? So for neck flexion, it's going to look a lot like slumping, right? We're just going to tuck the chin and let it go all the way, right? I think a lot of us spend plenty of time kind of in most of the way neck flexion, but we're like just holding it just off its end range. So this is an opportunity to let it go all of the way and just let the head be heavy. Again, try 2 to 4 minutes. Your body will let you know if it's had enough at the 2-minute point, or maybe even before that if it's really tender or sensitive. But if that's feeling pretty good, go for 4 minutes. Try 4 minutes. There is a little bit of this tendency where during the movement or while you're in the position it can feel pretty good, but coming out of it doesn't feel so great. So just test the water slowly. Just start with 2 minutes and then build up to 4 minutes over time. And we do the same thing with all of these other positions, right? Now, I did mention extension is a little bit riskier because of that kind of compressive nature of the spine, the compression of the facet joints. Again, they're designed to do that. They should be able to tolerate plenty of force, but if we haven't done that in a long time, we might not be ready for 2 minutes even of those positions. It's a little bit riskier, so we'll probably back off on that one. You might focus on other directions before you go into extension, for example, right? That would be perfectly fine. So when we're in those positions, like we mentioned, we're just going to breathe nice and easy, right? Make it as relaxing as possible. On the inhale, we just allow things to expand within the rib cage. That is going to change what's happening in the muscles around the shoulder and the muscles around the neck. And then the exhale is the opportunity to progress the position, right? We kind of advance the position a little bit. We relax into the stretch is another way to think about it. All right. And then the last thing that we do to finish the recipe is to strengthen. As we restore robust muscles and joints, we want to be able to have plan A stability in a lengthened position. That's kind of a big one that we'll highlight, and a shortened position. And if we have those, everything in between is usually the easy part. But the big one is the lengthened position. That's going to be what we'll focus on. So what would that look like strengthening into flexion and into extension and the rest of our movements? Well, we're actually going to start with isometrics. So isometrics is a term that's relative to the muscle itself, right? So we'll just think about like a lengthened position, shortened position of the muscle. Well, the isometric is the muscle's contracting, but it's not changing in length. And the way that we're doing this is it's a lengthened position, and then we ask it to contract out here. Okay? So what that would look like for our flexion and the muscles along the back of the neck would be like this here. Tucking down. I'm going to use my hand to counter pressure. And what I'm doing is I'm applying just enough pressure. Doesn't have to be a ton. Think like 30 to 40% effort, especially to start, of this little, pushing back, right? So my head is trying to lift up, but my hand is just holding it in place. Again, go easy. Just like these muscles aren't used to this lengthened position and contracting yet, but that's part of the process. So the question, I think, then becomes, well, how much of this do I do? Reps and sets. Generally, when we start, just do a 5x5. 5 rounds of 5 seconds. 5 rounds of 5 seconds. And then, if that becomes easy enough, feels okay while you're doing it, feels okay after, into the evening, and it still feels reasonable by the next morning, well, then we can ramp it up a little bit. Then eventually build to 5 rounds of 10-second holds. Okay. And then our other big dial, right? So we could increase the sets, we could increase the reps, but we could also increase the intensity. How much oomph are we giving it? Right? Once you're feeling pretty good at 5 rounds of 10 seconds, then we would start to go through the range of motion. So isometrics then become concentric eccentric, which basically just means now the muscle is contracting as it shortens and it contracts as it lengthens. So for flexion, it would look like this, keeping that pressure here. as we go through the movement. Okay, spend a decent amount of time with isometrics before you jump into with movement. Okay, maybe like a week or so for most people, plus or minus, depends on the individual, but use your better judgment with that one. So I know we said flexion, right? Just kind of named off of the movement because I am using my extensor muscles. So I recognize that the terminology, the phrasing can get a little confusing, but just go through all the directions. So let's next do extension, right? It would be here, isometric, usually hand on the forehead. Okay, and we'll feel some activation of the muscles in the front. Now, this one's a really good example for us to use as to how we position. So we mentioned reps and sets, how much pressure, but also the position that we're in, right? So I don't have to go all the way back to do the isometric. I can kind of go most of the way back, practice my isometric in that position. And then eventually the end of the range becomes available to us, becomes reasonable, and the risk to benefit ratio is in our favor, okay? So let's do rotation next. It would just be here, and then hand on the cheekbone. Okay, same approach. Right, so now my hand is resisting the rotation. 5 by 5 to start, building up to 5 by 10, and everything we just talked about for flexion, okay? Side bend, same idea. Here, now I'm usually using my opposite hand. I'm reaching over, and my head's trying to go this way as my hand is just locking it in place, okay? Same approach, all right? Isometrics, and then eventually for all of these, we'll build to with movement, concentric and eccentric. So let's do rotation and side bends one more time. So rotation would look like this. A little bit slower. Okay, we do that for both sides. And then side bend looks like this. All right, so I think that's a pretty good place to start. There's more in this conversation, but these are kind of the, as far as I can tell, the tried and true strategies, recipe that we can use to navigate neck tension and keep it at bay. If you are in a position where neck tension is a big part of your daily experience, go through these steps more regularly. Maybe you make it a daily practice. Eventually, the keeping the tension off won't require as much attention and time. You'll be able to do a heck of a lot less. But if you do have a history of this, like me, it never really fully goes away, right? All of the things that we do throughout the day, sitting for long durations and just moving our arms in various ways, does contribute to the tension. Like that is just the arrow of time. The body is going to become more tense over time unless we do something about it. So if we spend some time really working at it, getting ourselves to a better place, physiologically speaking, then the maintenance level becomes a heck of a lot easier. These things will become more and more routine. So yeah, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions, just let me know down in the comments, and I'll be checking in on those. I'm also going to put my notes so that you can follow along and reference this. Sounds good? All right. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for watching. Bye.